I wanted to ask you, Mr. President, about Iran and on Iran. You came to the conclusion that you couldn't negotiate with the IRGC. Does that mean that you might wipe them out like you did ISIS?
Yeah, it does. We will see what's happening. We received a call just as I was coming here. They want to meet. They always want to meet. But, you know, this should have been done by other presidents for many years, for 47 years, but really a lot longer than that, and it wasn't. And I never understood why, but now I do. Because if you're not going to do it the way I'm doing it, you're never going to make a deal with them. They were very difficult. They're good negotiators. They were tapping everybody along for 47 years. Then Obama came in and he just offered them, you know, a fortune of money. He paid them off. $1.7 billion in green cash and hundreds of billions of dollars.
So in this video, we're going to be breaking down the latest developments in the escalating conflict between the United States and Iran, including a new wave of U.S. military strikes, Iran's response in the Strait of Hormuz, what this means for global shipping and oil markets, and whether the situation is moving closer to a wider regional war. We'll also hear expert analysis on President Trump's strategy, the latest diplomatic efforts, and what could happen next. If you enjoy in-depth coverage of breaking geopolitical news, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's get right into today's report.
New information from the U.S. Central Command putting this on social media, saying CENTCOM ended an evening wave of strikes against Iran at 9 p.m. Eastern on July 15th. U.S. forces struck Iranian command centers, air defense sites, missile and drone capabilities, and coastal surveillance facilities to further denigrate Iran's ability to threaten innocent mariners crewing commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM used precision munitions to hit targets in multiple locations, including Bandar Abbas. Now, the U.S. military is ramping up its air attacks against Iran. Going to show you a look here at a simulation we have of marine traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. This is courtesy marine traffic. Now, of course, in the hopes of continued talks to end the war, the U.S. military is ramping up these attacks. And this comes as Israel levels its own threats against Tehran. Fox News correspondent Lucas Tomlinson reports on the latest.
The American air campaign against Iran has expanded. U.S. Navy jets now launching strikes around the clock, including daylight hours, in an effort to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. This afternoon, U.S. forces hit Greater Toom Island, outside the Strait of Hormuz, for the first time. The increased volume of airstrikes an attempt to clear a path through the Strait of Hormuz to increase shipping volume and potentially paving the way for U.S. warships to sail through, something that hasn't happened for 2 months. The U.S. naval blockade has now been in effect for more than 24 hours, forcing at least 2 commercial vessels to reverse course. With Iranian ports now closed, U.S. officials estimate the return of this economic strangulation will cost Iran more than $400 million per day. Iran is striking back, hitting 7 commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz with up to a dozen crew members killed, missing, or wounded. Iran has attacked Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, and UAE in recent days with dozens of drones and missiles. Interestingly, Israel has not rejoined the bombing campaign against Iran, but are prepared if Iran fires first.
Do not count on it being quiet if you attack us. Do not count on a rerun, because it will not be a rerun.
Netanyahu is expected to fly to Washington this weekend. A meeting with President Trump has not yet been scheduled.
Well, Jonathan Saye, a Iran research analyst at the FDD, joins us now to discuss. Hello, good evening to you.
Hi, great to be with you.
Well, we know this is back and forth strikes and days of them. Do you see this heading to an all-out war once again?
This is the closest we've been, and from the outside, it does appear to be all-out war, but the difference is One, of course, Israel has not joined the efforts like they did in the early stages, but more importantly, it's the nature of the targets that does not indicate all-out war. So for it to have that definition, it needs to go beyond military assets like we see right now. It would have to include senior figures, officials that are calling the shots on behalf of Tehran, as well as certain sensitive nuclear sites, such as Pickaxe Mountain, things of that nature, paired with a diplomatic campaign, perhaps talking to dissidents inside Iran. So far, we haven't seen any of that. The ambitions continue to be a calculation in Washington that thinks, or is under the assumption that pressure would bring Tehran back to the negotiating table, or it will moderate its behavior. But so far, we have not seen that strategy play out.
Well, tell us about the situation in the Strait and what impacts you expect on commercial shipping.
What we have seen, of course, is the regime has realized the main leverage it currently holds is the Strait of Hormuz. Initially, the perception was in Tehran that the proxies might be a better pressure point against both the United States and Israel. But as time went on, they realized the strait is much cheaper. It's more efficient for them to use it effectively as a hostage. If you look at what it takes from the Iranian side to throttle the strait, all you really need is one individual with a drone or maybe a cheap missile, and that simply would increase oil prices overnight, just one attack. So they're probably going to double down on that. But that said, when we look at the attacks, they're primarily centered in the southern coast of Iran. The 4 provinces, in addition to the islands that the Islamic Republic uses to wage war. So, of course, the U.S. military campaign currently would curb some of the regime's capabilities. But in the long term, it's a matter of time until the Islamic Republic again recalculates and re-strategizes and imposes these attacks again, which is why it's from the administration point of view, they are seeking to not only remove the capabilities of the Islamic Republic, but also the intent by signing an agreement or compelling them to come to the negotiation table.
You're seeing the Strait of Hormuz there on your screen. That's courtesy marine traffic. The U.S. reimposed a naval blockade. What was the tipping point for the United States to play this card again?
In short, it was Iran's violation of the MOU that was signed about 16 days ago at this point, and that's all it took. So if you look at the different articles of the Memorandum of Understanding, the Islamic Republic was receiving sanction waivers and was able to repatriate those funds. Effectively, it was tilted in its favor. And all it had to do was not to attack vessels going through the strait. And it did so for a variety of reasons. But ultimately, that was enough for Washington to maybe realize that they're not dealing with pragmatic individuals like they had initially thought. And the key point about the blockade is it's really not only the continuation of the maximum pressure campaign, but it's the most assertive form of its enforcement, in a sense that sanctions can only prevent so much. But the physical blockade was preventing also oil smuggling going to China. So the regime, of course, is losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And given the economic implications domestically for them, given how fragile that is, and given that they have to pay their own personnel, this in the long term is not going to play out well for them.
We've talked a little bit about the regime. I want to get more into that. What's the status of diplomacy between the two countries?
Tehran's ambitions have been trying to distract the talks from taking place or covering the main asset, which is the nuclear file. So as soon as the situation was looking a bit more optimistic, the MOU was signed, and the idea was, or at least J.D. Vance was really optimistic to actually discuss nuclear and technical negotiations. We saw the IRGC violate the MOU, violate the ceasefire, and derail those conversations again. So because of that, we're still quite far from getting closer to discussing the details of the nuclear agreement. And with that, there are a few pillars. The priority from this administration's point of view is removing the highly enriched uranium from Iran's nuclear sites that were bombed last year. But second to that, and what would follow when it comes to the nuclear file, would be pursuing ideally dismantlement and not allowing the regime to rebuild its centrifuges. But unfortunately, or at least in the short term, we don't even see that being on the agenda, given Iran maximalist demands and given how distracted everyone is dealing with the Strait of Hormuz and Lebanon and other lower priority items that Iran has elevated to distract and derail the conversation from actually taking place with any meaningful or fruitful implications.
Well, earlier today, President Trump went on Fox Business. He spoke about Iran. I'm going to play out this soundbite we'll discuss right after.
I wanted to ask you, Mr. President, about Iran and on Iran. You came to the conclusion that you couldn't negotiate with the IRGC. Does that mean that you might wipe them out like you did ISIS?
Yeah, it does. We will see what's happening. We received a call just as I was coming here. They want to meet. They always want to meet. But, this should have been done by other presidents for many years, for 47 years, but really a lot longer than that, and it wasn't. And I never understood why, but now I do. Because if you're not going to do it the way I'm doing it, you're never going to make a deal with them. They were very difficult. They're good negotiators. They were tapping everybody along for 47 years. Then Obama came in and he just offered them, a fortune of money. He paid them off. $1.7 billion in green cash and hundreds of billions of dollars. And that really set everyone else back because they started wanting to make nuclear weapons. And then we hit them just about a year ago, with the B-2 bombers, and that ended that. So we got a little bit lucky.
This war has been ongoing now for almost 5 months. Has the president's perspective on negotiating with Iran, has it evolved since then?
It appears that it has. Of course, having a deal-making instinct, Trump was really eager to not only secure an agreement that would be historic, but also do it rapidly. But the miscalculation with that perception is we are not dealing with pragmatic individuals in the Islamic Republic, in a sense that not only are they ideologically devoted to a different paradigm of Islamism, but in addition to that, to them is about power. It's about holding on to their image. And any compromise from their end would risk really not only losing their support base, but in the long term would be an existential threat to them. Parallel to that, Tehran's strategy has always been to have a good cop, bad cop scenario, if you will. On one hand, they have these diplomats that discuss thoroughly the regime's ambitions to de-escalate. On the other hand, their armed apparatus, of course, engages in different acts of violence and derails conversations. And oftentimes, these two sides project a false image that they're fighting against one another. And one side is trying to work with the United States, whereas the other side is the, unreasonable angle. Whereas in reality, I think every president after a certain point realizes that this is a deliberate strategy to try to obtain concessions, try to maximize their demands, try to get sanctions waiver and sanctions relief without giving up anything on their end, whether it's not throttling the strait or their nuclear material. So because of that, the president, I think, is gradually realizing that if you cannot make a deal, and if you cannot go back to a worse deal, that was the JCPOA that he withdrew from, it is really about finishing the job in Tehran. And he has numerous options on the table. The masses of Iranians inside the country are still awaiting him to call on them to protest, to rise up. Of course, they would require a bit of support, but that does not include boots on the ground. So he has multiple avenues to pursue. It's really a matter of finally realizing that no deal can be enacted with the Islamic Republic.
Now let's break down what we've just heard. The key takeaway from this discussion is that while the conflict has intensified with continued U.S. strikes and Iranian retaliation, the analyst argues that the current campaign still falls short of what would traditionally be considered an all-out war. Instead, the focus remains on military infrastructure, economic pressure through the Strait of Hormuz, and efforts to push Iran back toward negotiations. Another major point is the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz. Even a limited disruption there can have a significant impact on global energy markets and international shipping, making it one of Iran's strongest leverage points. At the same time, the United States appears to be increasing military and economic pressure in an effort to limit Iran's capabilities while keeping diplomatic options open. The interview also highlights the ongoing debate over whether diplomacy can still succeed, or whether both sides are moving toward a more prolonged confrontation. President Trump's recent comments suggest a tougher stance, while the analyst believes Iran's leadership is unlikely to make major concessions without significant pressure. Of course, these are the views and analysis presented during the interview, and the situation continues to evolve rapidly. We'll be watching closely for new developments and any official updates from the United States, Iran, and other regional actors. Now I'd like to hear from you. Do you think diplomacy can still prevent a wider conflict, or do you believe tensions will continue to escalate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest breaking news and analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.